Good evening and welcome to our weekly book study here at the New Covenant House. We are currently studying Christian Anarchism by Alexander Christoyanopoulos, who wrote this originally as his doctoral thesis and has been published in a book form. We are in chapter 2. Which is basically everything other than the Sermon on the Mount, and we are at the end of a small kind of mini series about Jesus' crucifixion. This will be the last installment in that series, and once I get around to it, I will most likely upload those sessions to YouTube, where they can be seen as a playlist, but I will get back to that later. The signal is a little weak tonight, but we will see if we can get through it. We have about a page or so about the last part of the crucifixion, which is what's next, taking up the cross, it's called. So we saw in the previous episodes that the anarchist writers see Jesus' crucifixion not as defeat, but as a triumph over the powers. And I think I'll get back to that a little bit further down the road tonight. In what sense it kind of increases my understanding of what that means in this particular chapter here. So, what Jesus did on the cross, he unmasked, disarmed, and triumphed over the powers, it says. But, as we all see, the battle continues. We need to continue until it's been effective on all fronts and visible to all, says Hendrik Berkhoff, who is a Dutch writer, in a book called Christ and the Powers, translated by John Howard Yoder, who is in his own right a prominent anarchist writer. We've seen him several times in this book. The powers may be defeated and condemned on the cross, but they live on, seemingly victorious, says Goddard. I do not know him, but that's what he says. Seemingly victorious, for the principalities and powers to the finally and fully defeated Christians have to follow. So, what for the principalities and powers to be defeated, Jesus says, we have to follow Jesus in disarming, making public spectacle of, and thereby triumphing over that contemporary manifestation. So in other words, we have to do the same thing Jesus did on the cross. So we have to make a choice, it says, between Jesus and the powers. Jesus invites us to whosoever will come after me, let him deny himself, take up the cross, and follow me. So there are 4 things you have to do. It's who wants to come after me will have to deny himself and take up the cross, and number 4, follow him. And Meyer says about this invitation to share the consequences of daring to challenge the political authorities, he says. That's Myers. We met Myers before. Myers is a fellow who is not really an anarchist, but anarchist writers refer to him a lot. He interpreted the Gospel of Mark, including all the miracles there, as the only one who did that. Yoder insists that it is one of the popular misuses of Scripture to interpret bearing one's cross as facing the private suffering of illness and accidents, loneliness and defeat. So you hear sometimes people say, oh, it's just my cross to bear. But that's not what it means at all, according to Yoder. Because Jesus' cross was the political, legally to be expected result of a moral clash with the powers. That's what Yoder says it means in his book called The Politics of Jesus, which I have read. I need to reread it, but I did already. So Jesus calls his followers to take up their cross. It's a call for them to follow his example of love, non-resistance, and political subversion to the ultimate sacrifice. So it's not enough to be against the powers. You've got to do it to the very end. We saw that last week. By embracing love and forgiveness instead unto the very end. And that was a fellow named Wogerman who wrote that. So we're going to get back to all this stuff in chapters 4 and 5, so I look forward to that. But for now, we'll just say that two things, well, it's said in two different ways. The vocation of the church, that's us. Berkhoff says, contending against the powers will lead to oppression and persecution. And that's not really a big surprise. Jesus was oppressed and persecuted. But in this very act of desperation, their unmasking is repeated and confirmed. They can no longer exist without being forced to uncover their true nature and thereby to abandon their role as gods and saviors. So the powers are trying to supplant God, and that's definitely happening in our society today, but it is our job to take up our cross and do what Jesus did to the very end. So I said that in a little different way. The mission of the church is to expose the true nature of principalities and powers and to thus unmask and triumph over the violence, the self-aggrandizement and the deception of the powers. Yet His can only be done by fighting nakedly and weakly, by surrendering oneself even unto death. So all the way to the end, according to Myers in a book called Binding the Strong Man. And Myers goes on, the suffering of the just is somehow in itself efficacious in bringing down the old order and creating the new. Myers asserts that the threat to punish by death is the bottom line of the power of the state. So, the triumph lies in that the state threatens with death, or it has the power to threaten with death. So, when you can overcome your fear of death, then you have triumphed over the power. The threat of killing you no longer matters. That is how we understand the triumph over the powers. In other words, by redefining the cross as the way to liberation rather than symbol of defeat and shame, the authority of the power is subverted because the power of death by which the powers rule is broken. So and that's what I just said. The threat of death is broken because you simply ignore it. You have the power to do that. Accepting and surrendering to death out of love and forgiveness disarms the state. The threat no longer is relevant, and does so without increasing the sum of evil in the world. This is kind of critical, that by surrendering completely to the enemy, you refrain from increasing the evil in the world. And we talked a little bit about that last week, where the Ukrainians could, if they wanted to, simply lay down their arms and the war would end, the suffering would end. And well, we're not sure that that the world would see it that way, really, because that would be definitely be ignoring the threat from the attackers. But the world now seems to be seeing the resistance of the Ukrainians as a heroic, and it is kind of doubtful in my mind that the world would see them as heroic if they were to lay down their arms. But that's what Jesus is calling us to do. Jesus sets the example with his crucifixion, and he expects his followers to be willing to follow him all the way to the cross. So there is no doubt about what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to lay down our arms and forgive and and not resist. So as a conclusion, which Christianopoulos does very well all the time, so let me just read the last paragraph here. In short, the cross is the symbol of Christian anarchism's stance against the state. It represents a willing acceptance of the costliest consequence of contending against the state. It epitomizes both the violent injustice of the state and the love, the forgiveness, and the non-resistance with which Jesus is responding to it. So he further summarizes that sentence in like this: the cross condemns the violence of the state, but also embodies the method to overcome it. So two things: it condemns the violence of the state, and it embodies the method to overcome it. So, and that was pretty much the end of the crucifixion section of this book. The next will be just resurrection. That is almost two pages, but the anarchist writers do not have a lot to say about on this subject. We will go through it anyway because it's kind of important, because the world, as we see it now, or at least in the Christian part of the world, the so-called Christian part of the world, the resurrection is really, really important. But in our mind, I think what the conclusion from this book is that the crucifixion is actually more important. Maybe that's debatable. I don't know. But we'll get back to that next week, and we'll see how we do. As I said, I plan to record these 5 episodes on YouTube, and so that they're preserved for future reference. And if anybody is interested in looking at them in order, then I can send you a link to that once I get it up there. So just let me know, and I will do that. Thank you for coming, and I will see you next week.